title of the event today mentions journeys of uncertainty. Now, what we had in mind were two types of journeys and two types of uncertainties. We had in mind the journeys of hundreds of thousands of migrants, including refugees, through often long and very risky routes and places where their safety, well-being, and survival are often uncertain. But we also have in mind the journeys of that many families have to make when they look for a relative who has migrated and gone missing, and where they're uncertain of whether that person is alive but unable to establish contact or has died. And these are family members that can be in the country of origin, but also in countries of transit or destination, including in Switzerland. You may recognize, you may remember a photo that won the World Press Photo Competition in 2013, this one here, where you have a group of migrants. This is in Djibouti. And they're holding their cell phones up, looking for a cell signal, and the caption of the photo, as it won the prize, said that it was migrants trying to look for a cell signal to contact their families. Not everyone is in this position, and so this is what we're going to talk about today. Not everyone can contact their families. So today's discussion also comes at a critical juncture in sort of the international arena, because at the moment, UN member states are negotiating the Global Compact on Migration. So this will be the first intergovernmental agreement that really will offer a framework for international cooperation on all aspects related to migration. Now, a year ago, the issue of missing migrants was practically absent from this discussion. And today, the draft text of the compact that is being negotiated has an entire section on missing migrants. So there's really a window of opportunity for measures that have been taken here and there in certain countries to really form part of a global concerted effort to prevent and to respond to this situation. So what we'd like to do today is two things. First, we'd like to understand better how and why migrants go missing, and what preventing and responding to this situation entails for families, for authorities, for international organizations, and for migrants themselves. So let me introduce you to the three panelists with us today who will lead us in this exchange. So we'll set the scene, and then we'll have a time for an exchange with you and Q&A. To my right, we have Esther Dross. Esther is a volunteer at the Swiss Red Cross, where she supports families of missing migrants who are looking for them. And so she'll relate to us the voices and the experiences of these families. Next to her, we have Gwenaëlle Fontana. Gwenaëlle is currently the Global Advisor on Migration here at ICRC headquarters. But before that, she worked as a missing persons advisor based in the Middle East. So she'll bring the two sides of this coin. Next to her, we have Kate. Kate works at the International Organization for Migration on a project called the Missing Migrants Project, which looks at data. It tracks incidents involving migrant deaths, or migrants that have gone missing during migration around the world. So she's our data person. And let me pass the floor to Esther. Esther, what is it like for the families of missing migrants to look for them, from your experience?
You're all mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, or cousins. And it's really, if you imagine that your son, daughter, somebody you love very much, goes on a journey, goes to Scandinavia. You don't exactly know how they will go there. They walk, they take a bike, they hitchhike, train, plane. You don't know through which route they go, but you know they go. And suddenly, and you trust so much your mobile phone, where you have the number and you can call. So you can call every night and say, hi, how are you doing? How is it going? And suddenly that phone is not replying anymore. That gives you this phone number cannot be reached. 1 evening, 2 evenings, 10 evenings, 3 months. You don't know where to start looking, where the person got missing, where exactly they are. And that's exactly how feels a family of a missing, either migrant or other missing people. To be completely unable to even start looking for the person.
So are there then, what is the situation like when they're trying to look for them? Where do they go? How is the search reality for these families? Who many of them are migrants themselves, correct?
Yeah, I mean there's different situations, but of course when you're a migrant yourself, you're already yourself in a very vulnerable situation. There is no network, there is no family, there is nobody who really supports you, except obviously the support network which is provided if you get to Switzerland, and you have probably an assistant social or somebody who looks after you. But there is nobody close to you who can support you, which makes it probably even worse to look for somebody when yourself you're already a migrant and in a vulnerable position. Mm-hmm. So we very much hope that they get to the Swiss Red Cross to start looking for their family members. Mm-hmm. So very often they will be directed through the where they look for asylum, or people who help them to get their papers, to get that information that they can come to us and start looking. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask Quinail, what are the circumstances, from the experience of the ICRC, having worked in many countries and supported families of missing migrants, what are the circumstances in which migrants can go missing nowadays?
To this question, I will first answer by telling the importance not to stick to a too European-centric perception of the phenomenon of missing migrants. People don't only go missing in the Mediterranean Sea, and I think we should not forget that it's a worldwide phenomenon, and many people go missing without us paying any attention to it because it's just not appearing on our television screens. And the second thing is also that often we have the perception that people who have gone missing are actually dead. And I think it's really fundamental that we stop presuming that missing persons are dead. And this for several reasons. The first reason being that it's simply not true. Unfortunately, many people missing are dead. But many are still alive, and they can, for instance, be detained without being allowed to contact their families by the detaining authorities. They can be in the hand of exploitation networks or abusive employers, and again, not allowed to be in contact with their families. It's also very possible that the family fled, let's say, a conflict zone and took different direction. So one part of the family is in one country, another part in another, and they're unable to meet each other. There are also many migrants who are forced to be hiding because they are afraid to be arrested, they are afraid that it creates trouble to themselves, because in some country you are not allowed to leave your country. So the family could face trouble because you have left your own countries. So there are a variety of phenomena. So it's really important to understand that not everybody is dead, and because if we misunderstand the complexity of the problematic of missing person, we will come with wrong answer. The answer is not only managing the dead, it's also looking at detention issues, looking at possibility for migrants to access services and so on. And last thing, why it's important not to presume missing migrant dead is because this can unintentionally do harm to the family, because many families, and this we see for families of missing migrants, but we know it also from our experience with people gone missing in relation to a conflict or other situation of violence, is from the community perspective or from a non-families of missing, after 5 years, 6 years, if a person doesn't reappear, we have a tendency to believe that they are actually dead and don't understand why the family doesn't want to turn the page and move ahead. And I think we need to respect the fact that for the families, the person is not dead, the person is absent, and the family will not believe that the person is dead until we have provided them with an adequate answer.
Thank you for that. And that distinction is important to bear in mind throughout this discussion. And we'll go back as well to some of these risks that you alluded to. Kate, and not Karen, can you give us an idea of what is the scale of this problem? Often the first question we get is, how many people are we talking about? From your work with the Missing Migrants project, tell us a bit about that project and what's the current situation?
Yeah, so in terms of the different uncertain journeys you're talking about, we really work with the first one I think you mentioned, which is about the migrants themselves on these journeys and the risks they're facing, and how many are missing and presumed to be dead, and those that are actually dead. So the project started in 2014. IOM started to systematically record whenever we could an incident in which someone died during the process of migration to an international location. So since January 2014, I just checked, and I mean, we recorded nearly 27,000 deaths until then, last week or so. And as Gwenelle said, it is definitely an international issue. So we are recording globally. Our best and most complete information is in the Mediterranean, which is also, and the European continent, which is also a bit ironic because the majority of those people are actually people who are not recovered from the sea. So that is where the Missing Migrants Project takes the word missing. That's what we're focusing on. Really, we do distinguish between the dead and the missing, but whenever we say missing, it is presumed dead, and that is because they were lost at sea.
And not found.
And not found.
Okay. So what are then the hot spots and the blind spots, so to speak, when you're looking at that phenomenon globally?
Yes, so just systematically starting to record has given us, an idea of hotspots. Of course, the Mediterranean is the most deadly migration route still, but other areas along the US-Mexico border, through Mexico, and also in the sea around, a few years ago in the Bay of Bengal, and then also around Indonesia, would we say there's hot spots. But there are many, many blind spots as well. And by that I mean we are really getting the tip of the iceberg, and that is in terms of numbers, but also in terms of what we know about people who die and those that we record. Just to give you an idea, I mean, the majority of the people we record, we don't even know their sex, and we don't know their gender. Or sorry, that's the same. And the age. Well, not the same, sorry. But their sex or let alone their identity, right? So not only are we very much undercounting how many people are dying on these journeys, but even the people we know so little.
So you're saying that we don't know how much we actually know.
In a sense, yeah.
What are then the challenges in getting this information about missing migrants?
Well, there are many challenges, which we've learned more and more about as we continue. We record, by definition, any death during migration, but the reality is that basically all of these deaths are happening during so-called irregular migration, and by that I mean migration that is not legalized by the state, is not regularized by the state, and that means that people are traveling in ways that they think they can avoid detection by authorities, which means they often take more risky routes, maybe through more treacherous territory, and so that leads to risks, but it also means that often people aren't found. And another issue we have is knowing if really when someone is found, maybe they don't have anything with them, they have no belongings, and they may be many countries away from where they started. So first of all, identifying them were they a migrant? Who are they? This is the tip of the iceberg of the data challenges.
Right. So with these challenges that Kate has outlined, Esther, can I ask you? So then, when a family is looking for a missing relative, and the Red Cross is helping them, what are the stages then that the Red Cross goes through when we're talking about a situation where migrants are in very remote areas or don't carry any identification? Where do you start then?
Well, we start from the other side. We start from the family who looks for the missing. So they will contact the Red Cross, and the Red Cross will go and talk to them, and will try to get as much information as they can provide on where they think the person was missing, or where they last had a contact.
Okay.
Which seems to be easy, but it's sometimes quite difficult, because when people are on the move, they don't necessarily know exactly where they are sometimes, between, which country exactly, or what's the name of the place. So it can be quite difficult just to identify these information. Different languages, different writings, so just that is very tricky when they try to get the information. Where did you last seen your father or your brother? But then that's the starting point where you will start looking. So you need some kind of starting point, or some phone number, or some person, somebody who might have remained back in the country, or whom we know that he reached, I don't know, Scandinavia or somewhere. But you need some point to go and start looking, because I think exactly of what you have been saying, like if there is no identification, if there is no identified place, the world is just simply too big.
So you go to the last point of contact and you take it from there, which I guess can imply being a point of contact that may be in another country, and so you need someone else to then look and follow up, right?
Well, it will go from the Swiss Red Cross, it will go back to the ICRC, to your colleagues, and then from there to the respective country where we think we can have more information. But obviously that takes a lot of time. It's a very long process.
Right. Gwenaëlle, I wanted to ask you, is this something that can be prevented?
There's a lot of things states could do and would not completely solve the problem, but drastically reduce it. I will not list all of the possible measures, but I would like to focus on a few of them. And the first one is really a call on our side to state to review a number of their migration policy, which actually increase the risk for migrants becoming missing. I mean, we fully recognize that states have the right to regulate irregular migration or migration on their territories, but this is not an absolute prerogative, but must be done by abiding by the rule of law and their international obligation, especially in terms of refugee law, but also in terms of human rights law. And we know that a number of their migration policies are putting people at further harm. For instance, we know that returning someone in a country where he would be at risk of persecution or of, for instance, enforced disappearance is prohibited by international law. We can imagine also that by the fact of preventing or criminalizing access to certain strictly humanitarian services, like the possibility to reestablish family contacts or to have access to healthcare. Here again, it puts people at further danger. We believe that it's absolutely fundamental to put in place a search and rescue operation in areas where migrants take risk. So there's a number of things in this field which can be done to prevent disappearance. Another thing is really connected to the detention of migrants. I would like just to precise that for the ICRC, detention of migrants should not be the rule, that the rule should be freedom and that detention of migrants should be the last resort. But when detention takes place, migrants should be allowed to contact their families. They should be registered. They should be detained in official places of detention. If they wish so, they should be notified to their consulate or embassy. If they die in detention, it's absolutely fundamental that everything is put in place to notify the death to the family. It seems rather obvious, but by visiting prisons throughout the world, there are many countries where migrants are just considered as very little, and where little effort is made to actually just inform their families of their death. And last thing, maybe in terms of prevention, which is absolutely fundamental, is the dignified management of the dead. And this really, it's also a problem in many countries, that migrants are just buried in unknown grave. Even they are identified, not identified. It's not possible to retrieve them a couple of years after their burial. So here we really, by improving the management of the dead, could make a huge difference in terms of identification and providing family with an answer.
I'm Marie Joduc. I'm also working with Swiss Red Cross, searching for missing persons. So I have two questions. One for Kate. The first one is, is there any collaboration between IOM and ICRC or Red Cross when you come upon persons who have persons they are missing? And my second question is concerning Italy, about the prevention, because there is disagreement with Libya. So how do you feel about the agreements? This is up to to Gunael, about the agreement that Italy made with Libya. How do you feel about that, please? Thank you.
My name is Mamadi Diakite, and I'm the Special Advisor of Security Humanitarian within UNAIDS, working particularly on the migration issue. So I have one comment, which is quite a bit striking me, concerning the data collection. I hear that, the data are not disaggregated, and more importantly, that it's extremely difficult for you to quite really have some factual evidence concerning, the classification between sex, gender, and so forth. So, of course, I understand the difficulties, but isn't it now a way to quite really set up a kind of robust policy in terms of data collection? Because, if you're not in a position to quite really get some of those evidence, how can we quite really pursue in terms of, bringing some of those issues at a more global level? The second question is now pertaining to how far some human rights mechanisms are involved, in this issue connected to, I know that there is a thematic mandate on missing person within Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, my former house. So, is there any synergy between what you're doing and them, in trying to actually address the issue, on a more human right, nature? And the last point is those who are probably missing, but due to, sexual exploitation, because, I understand that, there are tremendous cases, involving some of those, aspect. Of course, being missed would not necessarily imply that they are dead, but they are kept somewhere in a very secret detention, not detention known to others, but secret detention. And that can be also one of the areas where ICRC, having access to some of those areas, can also try, pushing, a very robust, tracing policy, in order to identify the whereabouts of those vulnerable population. Thank you.
Starting with the collaboration IOM, ICRC, who wants to go? Kate.
So we're working from the very macro perspective at the Missing Migrants project. And IOM officially doesn't do any tracing or identification of people. So, however, we do get requests sometimes, and what we do is we refer them to the ICRC and Restoring Family Links, and hope that they take it from there. So in terms of day-to-day collaboration, we kind of are just referring people. But I know ICRC and IOM kind of more in the field missions might have a bit more collaboration on a day-to-day level with searching for people. And I mean, in terms of ICRC is also getting more into this topic, and I think we're very in line with a lot of, the need for standardization in terms of, treatment of the dead, but also awareness raising, how families can search for their missing loved ones, all of these things. So.
If I may, I will maybe add that we should not forget that in terms of, on the question of the missing, the primary responsibility to address the question of the missing rests with states. And not with humanitarian organization. And here, one of our calls that we have in common, and that we will work together with IOM and a number of other organizations, is part of our project on what we call the standard setting project, where we will call state to standardize the way and develop standard on the collect of information, on the management of the dead, because for the time being, there are different systems of searching for the missing, collecting data are not compatible, so which make it totally impossible to answer the families, because the information is scattered in countries of origin, in countries of transit, in countries of destination, and none of their system is compatible, interoperable, and this makes it completely impossible to provide answer to families unless you are extremely lucky. But if the migrant has not his ID paper basically on him, then the probability, and even if he has his ID paper on him, the probability to identify him is extremely, or her, is extremely reduced. So here I think that the advocacy and the need for coordination is first and foremost among states, I would say.
So this partially actually answers as well your question on harmonization of data collection policies.
Exactly.
So there's a work stream starting now around the standardization project. Do you have anything to add on the data collection policy?
Well, I just wanted to add, to clarify, I mean, as it stands right now, no state releases or publishes data on migrant deaths. So we encourage them to do so, but I mean, there's issues of impartiality and priority and all of these things, and lack of standardization. So yes, there definitely is a need to promote this, but as you said, it is the states who are fundamentally responsible.
Yes. The question about the politics, Italy, Libya, the agreements that are made, who has any thoughts on that?
I think it was for the ICRC, if I understand well. Before answering this, I will just add something maybe on the question of data, because I think standardization is fundamental, but another issue which is absolutely fundamental and is a major challenge is data protection. Because it's very clear that if the data on migrants, on missing migrants, are used for purposes of combating, for instance, irregular migration or for law enforcement purposes, families of migrants will be reluctant to even report that they have a relative missing, because it can create him trouble or her trouble, it can create themselves trouble. So it's very important that the humanitarian objective to provide family with answer is protected from use for surveillance purpose. And I think this is a big challenge ahead. On the question of Italy, Libya, I think the question of I don't think it's a space basically for blaming and shaming any states here, because if we start this, I think the list of states to be blamed is quite long, and that we are engaged as the ICRC in a bilateral dialogue with the different governments on how they could improve their policy to create an environment which is less conducive to people and migrants going missing. But what is very clear is that a number of migration policies are producing missing migrants, and this at many layers, and we really need to look at this and work with states on how to address these issues.
Mm-hmm. On this issue of migration policies producing situations where migrants go missing, the question about sexual exploitation, trafficking that we had as well, are there places where it's harder to find migrants who have gone missing? Looking at the range of places where the ICRC in its search for a missing person can access and go to, are these places where they're held by criminal organizations harder to get in? Is it a bigger challenge than, say, if they're in a place of they're detained by a government somewhere?
I would say that more the environment is respectful of and acknowledging that migrants, regardless of their status, are right holders. The more the families are likely to approach humanitarian organizations, but also authorities, because it's also first and foremost the role of the police, the role of the authorities to help them. So I think more the climate is conducive to human rights, recognize that migrants, even irregular, are right holders, the more it's open and there are opportunities. And the more they will be forced to hide, the more it will be complicated to...
And a word on the role of human rights mechanisms. We had that question as well, maybe in the collection of data or in the political influence. How have you seen them position themselves in this discussion around missing migrants?
I think it's a collective undertaking. Yes. I really believe it's a collective undertaking that if we want to solve this problem, states need to assume their responsibilities and start to work together with the support of international organizations who have an expertise in the field of the missing. And there are a number. There are IOL, but there are also ICMP, the ICRC, OHCHR, a number also of NGOs. I mean, there's a number of actors, but the key of the success for us is clearly a willingness of states to work together to solve the issue.
As you know, disappeared persons and missing migrants might be in the hands of traffickers. What do you do to prevent this, or even to try to save those people from the traffickers?
I'm Tina, I'm staff at the ILO. I have a question for Esther, actually. How does ICRC interact with families who have missing members? Is there a certain protocol when you interact with them? I assume the situation is very grave, and I wonder how personal or individual level interaction is done.
And my question, I'm Hugo Slim, Head of Policy at the ICRC, is just to, you're all making calls on states and governments to do more, and I wonder if you could just elaborate a little there. Are you asking for all governments to set up a missing persons bureau and then to have some major global missing persons bureau? Is there something concrete you can say that you're asking them to do?
I'm Carla Uriarte, I'm also working with the ICRC, and my question is for Esther, regarding your experience with the families of missing here in Switzerland. I understand. What would you say are their main needs?
Esther, what are the main needs of families, and are there set protocols for families to come to you for assistance?
So maybe I want to reply to your question first on set protocols. There is some kind of a guideline how you approach families once they get to us, but then it's very much, I think, linked to our personal experience and our other work we do, which we rely on. So all the senior experts of the Swiss Red Cross are former ICRC staff, so we somehow know how back in time the tracing system worked, and we've lots of field experience, so we've dealt with a lot of different cultures, languages, worked and lived in different countries. So for me personally, in the work I'm doing outside of that volunteer work, I'm a child protection specialist, and I do a lot of investigations into exploitation and abuse. So I do a lot of interviews with very vulnerable people, which is certainly helpful to when you have to go and talk to the families of missing, because somehow it's not the same, but it's very vulnerable people who need to somehow trust us so that they want to tell us. You can't just come and say, give me your name, and so you need some time to build up the trust. And that is probably one of the things I sometimes think is also important for these families. It gives them somebody to talk. So I'm quite often contacted by one of person who is from Ethiopia, and I lived in Ethiopia, and I know when she calls me and says, I want to know if you have any news, it's very often more to also have the possibility to talk about Ethiopia and feel that she talks to somebody who knows the context quite well. So I'm not sure if that completely answers your question. The other question was
the needs.
The
needs of families.
I think what family really needs when they get to us and want to really are on that process, have decided to go on the process to look for family members, they're lacking a lot of information. It's at the beginning, I think, a lot of waste of time, because simply people don't necessarily know where to go. They don't necessarily get the right information. There's a fantastic tool from the Red Cross which is called Trace the Face, but many people don't know about it. Even in the so-called centers or where the asylum seekers or migrants go, it's not always well known. So there is a bit of lack of information, access to information. And if they had more information, and there I get to the prevention as well, if the information was already much earlier. Sometimes I've dealt with people who simply did not keep the telephone number of people back home. It was in their mobile phone, and the mobile phone is lost. So that's very simple. But maybe if we were better in sometimes just alerting people on the other, even earlier, not when they go to Switzerland, but when they start the journey on these issues and on these possibilities, maybe that would already be a little help to make it easier. Mm-hmm. So information is an issue. Very often translation is a very practical issue we have. Mm-hmm. Like, yes, many people speak Arabic or Syrian or Somali or Eritrean, and we don't. So it's simply sometimes a human factor which is missing to just have access to somebody needs to pay for these people. And so sometimes it's just really complicated to get that kind of support. Huh? Mm-hmm. And then maybe a last thing is that even if there is a lot of technology today, there is a lot of, we all have WhatsApp, and migrants also have WhatsApp, and we have Facebook, and we have algorithms who can connect people together. But at the end, what is still important is the human factor. So it's also about having the enough human resources you need to talk to people to get information and maybe be able to help them. It cannot just be dealt with through technology. I mean, technology is a great support, but at the end, there is also a human factor which is important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. for that. The
On
question
the need, if I may just
Yeah.
ask, I was just add is just to prepare this session. I read again a family need assessment that we made for Senegal, and I was really for families of missing migrants, and we asked them what were their main needs, and I was really I mean we've made many family need assessment for missing migrants, but also for missing, and I'm always really surprised, and in the same time not surprised, because it's really a common feature. Is many of these families had lost a breadwinner. It was a young man, so they lost a significant income. Many of them get indebted to pay for the journey, and at the end of the day, when we ask them what is your main need, it's not economical support. What they need is to know. They want to know what has happened to their loved one. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a need that we need to address. And where I fully agree with you is human touch. Sometimes is just enormous. And I remember a case. It's a colleague who told me the story. It's a family who was of Syrian, and their son, I think he was 17, died, and his body was found in Greece. And at the end of the day, his body was identified, and the family could just see a picture of his grave. I mean, it was just bare earth with no name on the grave. Just the colleagues who took the picture put a small flowers on it, and took the picture of the place where their son was buried. And the fact, that this person was not a number anymore, but was a human being with a grave, with someone paying attention to his grave, with a name given back, and with an history, is absolutely fundamental. And I think this human dimension is key.
So we have on the one hand this need for a human, the human dimension that you mentioned, the contact with the family directly, the image of the grave, the dignity in death, and at the same time we have this rather dry standardization of data, harmonization of legal frameworks on data protection, things like that. So to get back to Hugo's question then, how do you bring all that together? And especially if you're calling on states to do something, what kind of is it a mechanism? How do you bring these two aspects together?
Yeah, well, it's not so simple as all states should immediately and tomorrow will have standardized frameworks. Of course not. So Missing Migrants produces an annual report every year called Fatal Journeys, and in the last one there are a few copies outside, but it's also online. In the Fatal Journeys report, we make 5 recommendations in the last report about how to improve data. Again, this is on the dead and presumed missing, and so that is, more steps that we can take tomorrow. For example, there's lots of states that aren't going to, or areas, regions, where there just isn't going to be states starting to accurately and in a standardized way record when a migrant dies and where they're buried. So we're trying to really encourage and promote big surveys where migrants are surveyed, and in these regions, for example. So basically alternative sources of information. Where migrants are surveyed on their journeys about maybe a lot of different topics, but one might be, anyone that you were traveling with, did you witness them? Did they go missing? Did they die? How did they die? Where? And of course, I haven't done those surveys, of course, but they're done by trained people who are doing, vulnerability assessments and go through this process, and they can't do it on a large scale. So there's also the problem of how representative that is. Anyway, so promoting surveys in some regions. Another area we're looking at is just looking at administrative data. Like a lot can be found in, the municipal records of, for example, the Greek islands. Or, I mean, every year what we're doing is we call every county along the US border. And this came out in the news a few days ago. I mean, so, yeah, what the state puts out as their number is not equal to when you count all along the border, because they have a different definition of what they count, for example. So these are administrative records that just aren't kind of put together and collated and seen at a bigger scale. Mm-hmm. So
we're talking about access to availability of that information and harmonization of information.
Mm-hmm.
That's one part.
And then back to, I guess, also to the human rights aspect is just that, I mean, that every death should be treated as the same, like the state has responsibility to do certain things when someone dies, regardless of their nationality. So
so it's a question of prioritization that has already come up as well, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Gwenaël, anything on
I wish I had I wish I had the solution, but I think none of us has it. We know that there's a need for standardization. There's a need for also sharing data along the migratory road between the different states. But we don't have a full package to propose to states. I think what is needed is that states, they acknowledge the gravity of the problem, they acknowledge the complexity of the problem, and then they start in a spirit of cooperation to look at it, and we are interested in working together, but we don't come with a already made solution, unfortunately.
And it sounds like to a great extent there are existing mechanisms that states already have, that if a body shows up, there are protocols to so there are already things that exist that are somehow just not used, if I understand correctly. So it's not necessarily about creating something new. Is that what I'm taking on this though? And this links to the question that we had again on trafficking. There are situations. So I mean, human trafficking is a criminal activity. So states have an obligation to enforce the law in that regard, and in doing so, perhaps they can then find persons who are reported missing actually by their families. Are there any precautions or any risks that you would see in when states enforce such laws to repress criminal activities such as trafficking, that they should bear in mind so that they don't expose the migrant to further harm, the migrant who's being held in this place? Are there protection considerations to take into account here?
Well, first of all, I must acknowledge also that the ICRC is not an organization which has an expertise and in the field of trafficking. So, I mean, we should speak from this perspective first. And we acknowledge that there's a vulnerability of victims of trafficking. This is very clear, and that this vulnerability, whenever possible, should be addressed. And these people are in need of protection and should be protected as such. So this, I think, is the common ground. Then, for us, what is extremely important is that often I'm thinking about Camus. We say that if we don't name our things properly, we add to the ugliness of the world. I think it's extremely important also that the concept of trafficking and the concept of smuggling are clearly understood as separated. I think it's something important. And I also would add maybe that in connection with trafficking, victims of traffickings and perpetrators should not be confused. And here very often we can see that it can create further problem for the victims, but I'm not sure I'm in position to say much more.
I'm Jörg Hessling. I'm a member of the committee of the ICRC and was a delegate long ago. And my question is, what do you think about these new technologies the mobile phones, should they be provided like a human right, as we provide shelter or food or water? Because when I was in 2015 in Vienna and Austria, in the airports and especially in the railway stations, everybody of these migrants had a handy, and I was surprised to see that. And I can imagine how much the situation has changed just by such a little technical help. Because in our times we only had handwritten notes and the Red Cross messages to be filled in with by hand.
My name is Ralston Deffenbaugh. I'm retired from the Lutheran World Federation. My question is in the context of an ICRC visit to a place of detention. How is the ethical decision made about whether it's safe to notify the family or to put the detainee in contact?
Sorry, my name is Pauline. I work for ICRC, and I had a practical question. When the Red Cross, the Swiss Red Cross, or any national society everywhere, do we also look for missing migrants? Because we talked about human trafficking and that missing migrants might be victims of crimes. Do we also look for them, search for them in those environments? So, for example, sexual exploitation, would we go to certain neighborhoods? Would we look on internet, on certain websites?
Technology, shall we start with that one? Is it a game changer? Esther, what do you think? You've spoken of technologies, but I've also heard you speak about Red Cross messages. So it sounds like both are still in play.
Exactly, I think you need both. I'm a complete advocate to give out mobile phones, SIM cards, chargers. People need to charge their phones, and you can see that this is, in all those circumstances, extremely important, because that's a very easy mean to keep in contact and not be missing. But it cannot replace, I think, the Red Cross message. If you're in a detention, if you're in a prison in Ethiopia, you have no access to mobile phones, so the good old Red Cross message is still a very good way to get in contact with the family. The problem of minors and how you protect minors when we talk about trafficking. There is also a risk with these technologies of, for example, I was 2 years ago in Serbia. There was huge issues with minors and being trafficked, and lots of internet solicitation. And so this is a risk. We need to, somebody needs to mitigate that risk. But I don't want to say that we shouldn't have technology. I mean, that's definitely not my message. I think it's great. I mean, you can do a lot. But the old ways of doing sometimes is still also quite valid, and maybe in some circumstances more protective, because you can, maybe partly that replies also to your question on the detention. You can censor the Red Cross message, you can take out, you tell people what they should put on that message, what is a safe message to write on the Red Cross message. Whereas if they're on WhatsApp, they will sometimes not be very careful and maybe put a risk to their family members back home, depending on which country they come from. So we can more, I think we can more, not control, but somehow, yes, we can damage control. Like when you take the Red Cross message, you would also always say, don't put this, because this will not go, this is not a good idea, just say you're fine, don't say where you are, and stuff like that. Whereas if they go on Facebook, they not always...
So this goes back to the human contact that you mentioned before. It's not only something that is needed by families, it's also something that's protective for them. That's very interesting. There were then two questions about ICRC modes of ways of working. So sorry, Kate, I'm going to throw these to Gwenaëlle. How is it deemed safe to notify families of people in places in detention, and the other question about how far do we go when a migrant might be missing because they were trafficked. How do we go to all these places to look for them?
Alors, maybe this is not specific at all to missing migrants, to migrants in detention. Sorry, it's really for any person. The ICRC only notifies the family or potentially the consular services if the person gives its consent. So there's a discussion with the detainee to know first whether he wants to be notified to his family, and if not, he is not, obviously, and to his consular services. And for some countries, there's also an assessment by the ICRC when we think it could be dangerous for the family. So there's special attention which is also put in place. So I think this is really the basic of the basic in the way we work. Then on the question of whether we engage into looking we are not investigators. It's not that we are the police and we start to look for the missing person with a gun in the pocket and make a so basically this is not concretely something we do. We are not police, so we will not rescue by force people who are in the end. But it's very clear that we will engage on looking on this issue with state, also potentially with non-state armed group. In a number of countries, we also engage with people who are at the frontier between authorities, non-state armed groups, criminal network, because all of them are difficult to distinguish sometimes. And this is what we can do, but also the limit of what we can do.
Maybe just to what you said before, when you said what is important is that people know. So I think that's the same. When some cases like you've just been saying, this is the limit of the work you can do. So yes, you will not take a gun and rescue somebody who is trafficked or exploited or in slavery. And I think for the families, this also is very important, not to raise hopes or say that, yes, this is now in the hands of the ICRC and everything will be fine because we'll come on a white horse and find the person, because that's not the case. So it's very much of being also honest about the limits of what you can do and how much you can do, rather than raise false hopes. And the limit sometimes is very, very fine, because you want to raise hopes when somebody in front of you says, will you find my son? You want to say, yes, we will. But it's very often not necessarily that easy. So it's to make people aware that it will take many years, or it can take many years, and it's going to be a long journey with lots of ups and downs.
Yes, hello, my name is Eddie Abeck. I'm working in the ICRC in the RFL Missing Persons Unit. I've got a question somewhere between IOM and the ICRC, but primarily to Kate, maybe from the IOM. We heard in the beginning Gwenal underlining that in the concept of the ICRC, we should not presume that missing persons are dead persons. And we have heard then from you, Kate, that the Missing Migrants project is actually a project where you record data on that unidentified dead. So in terms of technology and concepts, isn't that an obstacle if the two organizations have very different definitions of what a missing person is, and misleading then in terms of also advocacy efforts, interventions towards states and so forth?
Yeah, no, it's something definitely to think about. It's very clear that we are working with different concepts of the missing, and so as much as possible we're trying to constantly clarify that when we count the missing, I mean, by the very name of the project, unfortunately, it is maybe a bit misleading, because people also think of the other concept of the missing, where they may still be alive. Saying that there are other missing migrants projects at smaller levels which count, for example, on the US-Mexico border, there's another missing migrants project that also is counting people who are dead. So it's all mixed up, unfortunately. But yeah, it is something to think about, because, yeah, the missing and the dead are clearly separated in our records, which are all transparent, by the way, and downloadable online. They're all anonymous, but we differentiate between the dead and the missing. But all those in the missing are people who have died over water. They are presumed dead because their bodies have not been recovered, as I said earlier. So we're not counting people, for example, in Mexico, who haven't heard from their loved one for years. Of course, we're not going there. So yes, there are definitely, this word missing is being used in different ways. And yeah, I'm not sure.
Maybe just to say, we already agree on the definition of migrants, which is already something big, because we don't have a common definition of migrants worldwide among states, among. So, for instance, for both organizations, we consider that migrants include refugees, and that we don't oppose the deserving refugee and the undeserving migrants, which I think it's already a fundamental common point, and the fact that this is something enormous ahead of us, and it shows really the challenges in terms of collective coordination.
But yeah, and just to give you a small insight is that we do get, as I already said, actually, we do get requests from families about their loved ones, looking for them, and that, yeah, it's purely because they don't know that we do something very different. So then we are referring them to the ICRC. Yeah.
So that there's an element of complementarity as well.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
So I'd like to wrap up the discussion by asking the three of you, from the perspective of your work now today, if you project yourselves in 5 years, let's say, what is the main thing that you would like to see change? And we all agree that we all would like for there not to be as many migrants going missing or dying. But from the perspective of your day-to-day work now, assisting and collecting data and assisting families of missing migrants, what is the main thing that you would like to see change in 5 years? Esther, can we start with you?
Well, I think the main thing I would like to see change is that first people do know, do get access, do get being the information from your project of people unfortunately being dead or not. That's all. I think that's all very important. So information and more cooperation. Just listening to you, I was thinking there is so many different layers, which makes it really difficult for us sometimes to understand. So I'm just thinking, if I was a migrant, I would not know if I go to the German Red Cross or to you or to you or to you. You know, so
clarity. Yeah.
Clarity.
Great, thank you. Buenayan.
I'm going to repeat myself, but for us, for me, what we would like to see change and what must change is the fact that states shall collectively take their responsibilities. This is something we are advocating for in the negotiation for the compact. The question has been included, which is a very positive development, that they acknowledge the gravity of the issue and that they consider their migration policy sometimes in a critical manner to understand how a number of their policy result in people becoming missing.
Okay, so political will.
Yeah, action, yeah.
Kate.
Okay, yeah, I mean, related to that, in 5 years, I'd like to, I mean, one of the aims of the project is to show just the scale of migrant deaths and the risks that people face along the way. But what I'd like to see is that people really remember the humans behind the numbers, and that's something in part is very difficult to do when we know so little, like I said, about these people. But at the end of the day, they're all individuals, like Esther is working with, or she's working with the families. And so really, humanizing the people behind the data.
So the human element has really become a red thread here, even on the very otherwise dry subject of data.
Of course.
So, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kate.